Thank you so much. And what a delight it is to be here with you this evening. Such a delight because I could not have been here this time last year. Life was coming at me pretty fast and furiously, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in the few minutes we have together. But first, I have a question for you. You're here to buy new handbags. Old handbags or new handbags? Is there a little keepsake that's always in your handbag? Something that you'll transfer? Maybe it's a picture of the kids. Maybe it's your first pay stub. Something that means something to you, something special. I've got it. I'll just find my pocket here. I've got one, and it's a little coin that says Sláinte on it. Anyone with a Celtic background knows what that means. Health, cheers. And it was given to me by my best friend after I spoke at her father's funeral. He was a proud Glaswegian. And every now and then I put my hand in my purse to get a quarter, and I touch this coin, and it reminds me of Bob, and it reminds me of Evelyn, and I smile. Well, recently, I put another keepsake into my purse, and that's the story I'm going to tell you, if you just indulge me for a few minutes. As I say, a year ago was pretty difficult times in the Gilbert-Lepage household. Any of you who've been caregivers will know this. Cancer does not fight a fair battle. And my mom had beaten it once, but around about October, she'd been told that treatment was not working anymore, and she opted for palliative care. Now, that doesn't mean no care. That means supportive care. And despite our sadness, there was some relief and a belief that there would be a system there. She was assigned a palliative care doctor. With pain would be managed. There was a 24-hour on-call line. So we felt confident that there was a support system there to help Mom through this, and we would get through it together. I look back now and think how naive we were. I don't want anything I say tonight to be construed as a criticism of anyone in the medical professions at all. We met through our journey some amazing people in the system, but the system is broken. It is past capacity, and it is ill-prepared for the gray wave now lapping at our shores. Well, as the weeks went on, my brother, my husband, and I became a tight little trio, a relay team, doing what we could, and absolutely positive that when we needed it, the cavalry was coming over the hill. Only it never came. Calls went unanswered. To this day, I cannot tell you who our caseworker was. They seem to change. And it's a confusing system to navigate. And even with resources, the private care wasn't even there. There was no one to help. And so desperation set in, along with pain. And although Mom received prescriptions for heavy-duty oral painkillers, it was no better than giving her breath mints. And by late December, she was screaming. She couldn't move, she couldn't eat, she wouldn't drink. And so despite all advice, I called an ambulance. And then we were introduced to the horrors of hallway medicine. And I hear a rumor of recognition there. Although we did get a final diagnosis, the tumor was large and pushing on her spine. That's where the pain was coming from. The doctor that very evening said to me, "Don't worry, your mother is never going home again." And though that was sad for Mom, it was a huge relief that there was care coming. Well, Mom wound up in the maternity ward. 89 years old, wound up in the maternity ward. And in the entire time we were there with her, we saw one young family with a baby. The ward was full of women like my mother who had no place else to go and no alternative and no home care. And then, just after the new year, they kicked her out of hospital. Well, with reason, acute care beds are no place for someone in palliative care, and there was nowhere else to go, and she wound up at home with 3 hours' notice. We scrambled to find a hospital bed for the front room. Luckily, the community care nurse showed up about an hour after Mom, so the IV pump was hooked up. But that's where we were. And although there was an IV pump, Mom pulled it out regularly. And you had to call to bring the nurse in to redo the butterfly clips and what have you. So I developed an early warning system. I had a yoga mat that slipped underneath Mom's bed in the living room, and I slept on that so that if she stood up in the middle of the night, she stood on me. And I grabbed the pump before she pulled it out of her arm. So that's the state we were at by the end of January. And then the box of equipment arrived with instructions on what to do if she passed away during a snowstorm and no one could get to us. And I was terrified, absolutely terrified. And then, out of the blue, someone, somewhere, the fates, smiled on us. And I got a call from McNally House, which is a 6-bed hospice in Grimsby, my mom's hometown. The bed was available. A bed was available. We didn't tell Mom because she may have refused it. We packed her up, we took her, not quite knowing what to expect. After all, we were taking her to a place where people went to die. And that's a morbid thought. Well, what did we walk into? A bright, spacious, modern home, a happy place where people were smiling and laughing and welcoming. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, she'd been showered, her hair had been done. Her meds had been adjusted, pressure sores had been cared for, and she was sitting up in bed like a queen in clean pajamas. By 7 o'clock, she'd had a dinner of her choice, ice cream with chocolate sauce, thank you very much, served by a volunteer who was an old friend and neighbor, because volunteers are so much a part of the hospice community. And she was tucked up in bed by 7, sleeping peacefully, more comfortable than we'd seen in months. And then the evening supervisor popped in and strategically, now I look back on it, strategically stood between my husband and I. And I said, Mom's doing well. She's okay. She's comfortable. We're going to pop out for a bowl of soup. And she said, of course your mom's fine. I'm not here to talk about your mom. I'm not here for your mom right now. I'm here for you. This is what we mean by a circle of care. And she put her arms around both of us. And she said, we're here now. You go back to being a family. And 600 pounds lifted off my shoulders. From the moment you become a caregiver, your family dynamic changes. You're no longer the daughter, the sister, the partner. You're the cook, the chambermaid, the amateur pharmacist. And the patient becomes dependent and loses their agency. I was focused on the immediate rather than what my family was looking ahead to in terms of changes within our family structure. And I gave no space to my mom or to her emotional well-being and her end-of-life journey. Mom came roaring back. We had a few precious days. They call it the McNally Rally in Grimsby, actually. Her pup, Nikki, got to visit. She regaled staff with full-throttle renditions of Broadway musicals in the kitchen. She ate her weight in Quality Street chocolates, and she even got out for a drive to the golf club in my brother's new truck. Several times on cold, crisp days. She lived every moment until she couldn't. And at the end, she was comfortable, she was peaceful, she was surrounded by family, and she was fortified in her faith. And really, what can any one of us hope for when the end comes? Now, I'm a pretty pragmatic girl. I was a reporter for over 20 years. Things are pretty black and white with me. But there were a couple of strange little coincidences that happened through that period of time. When I think about it now, I think maybe they weren't coincidences at all. Maybe I was exactly where I was supposed to be at exactly the right time. Two come to mind in particular that I'll point out. One, while at hospice, I stepped out of the room one evening to get a cup of tea. And I ran into the man who was leaving the room next to us. So we struck up a conversation, as you do. And I said, I can't believe there isn't a facility like this in every community in this province. It just makes so much sense. And he said, oh, don't tell me, I know. There isn't one in my community either. Matter of fact, I'm working to make sure that that happens. And I said, oh, where are you from? He says, Whitby. So Whitby met Ajax, and I met John Rycroft. And John is the treasurer of the campaign to build Roger Anderson House. And I suspect he's a large part of the reason why I'm here this evening. And the second coincidence is that a few weeks ago, I finally got around to the task of starting to clean up my mother's home. It's taken me a while to mentally get myself there and to start with her clothes. Every garment that I gave away felt like I was erasing a little piece of her. And there were 3 closets. The first closet I reached into, and the first garment I reached to grab, was a red suit jacket. And I checked the pockets, and I checked for buttons to make sure they were all there, and I checked the lapel for any jewelry. And I found this. Probably not be able to see it in the back of the room. It's a hummingbird pin. If you have any familiarity with the hospice movement, you know that hummingbirds and dragonflies are symbols of hospice. Hummingbirds float freely. They can fly backwards, they touch the past, and they connect to the future. Their grace reminds us that beauty is everywhere, life is rich and fleeting, and they symbolize hope. McNally House was full of hummingbird paintings. There were several in my mother's room. And as I reached out to begin my life without her, here was a hummingbird to remind me of the gift of those last few weeks and the compassion and care we received at hospice. So, that's what's in my handbag. A hummingbird pin, a little memento, and a quiet reminder. One last thought. There's something else that we all carry in our handbags that can make a difference, whether the handbag is old or new. And it's the power to ensure that hospice care will be available for Durham families when they most need it, with a gift to Roger Anderson House. Because the end of life deserves as much beauty and respect as does the beginning. Thank you for your attention.